True compatibilist, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, would say that the reason you chose chocolate rather than vanilla, if you're a theistic compatibilist, is because God sovereignly and unchangeably decreed for your desire to be for chocolate over vanilla, at least at that point in time. Is that correct?
Right, absolutely. It's going to apply to all areas of life, and I think one of these guys even say later that God not only causally determines all the big things, but even the little things, including the choosing the chocolate or vanilla.
Right, and so where this becomes a problem is not so much with chocolate vanilla, because who cares, but it becomes the molester's desire and choice to molest, the rapist's desire and choice to rape, all these horrible, heinous things. Which, by the way, we're not just invoking these emotive examples just to be emotive and to be dismissive of these guys. These are things that philosophers oftentimes use because they're the worst evil our minds can imagine, and that's whenever the philosophical discussions become very practical and the rubber meets the road. And so we have quotes from Piper and other philosophical theological discussions using these examples, fair examples, because they're the ones that are the worst of the worst. And so when it comes to soteriology, it's the person's desire to reject Christ. Who is the one who's causally determining that person's desires to be one that would reject Christ? Well, it's God. So God causally determines for the desire of everyone who rejects Christ to be a rejecter of Christ. Now, a Calvinist very rarely comes right out and says it that way, because they will often appeal to, as you'll hear them talk about later in this broadcast, if we get that far, that, well, those are secondary causes. In other words, the secondary cause, God, yes, God does decree it, but he uses secondary causes. Well, what's the secondary cause? The secondary cause is the desire of the man. Well, again, in any way that you can explain that's rational, is the secondary cause not just as in control of God as the primary cause? In other words, in what sufficient way or significant way is the person's existence directly caused? Yes. How is their desires not directly caused also by God on your system? Because I see no rational basis on which to say that a person's desires are owned by them if God's ultimately the one who is decisively causing what they desire any given moment at any given time. Am I missing something there?
No, yeah, you're absolutely spot on. In fact, Aristotle differentiated 4 types of causes, and the 2 important here would be final causes and efficient causes. So a secondary cause would be an efficient cause, and then a final cause will be the reason for which these efficient causes are happening. So if I'm playing pool and I want to win the game, then I'm going to hit the 8 ball in the right pocket at the, when that's the last one for me. The sufficient cause of the 8 ball going into the pocket was me getting the stick, hitting the white ball, and then hitting the 8 ball, and then there's a chain of events. So these are the sufficient causes, but it was for a final cause, and that final cause was initiated by me, the first mover. So in that sense, it doesn't matter. These sufficient secondary causes aren't necessarily relevant for the responsibility of what that final cause was trying to achieve. Once you find out who was achieving that final cause, that is the person responsible for winning the game, if you will. We don't look at which balls were hit. We look at who was the one hitting the balls.
That's one of the reasons I've read from John Piper when he talks about the decisive cause, because he's ultimately getting to the point of who is ultimately the decisive cause. In other words, the decider when it comes to soteriology, who's ultimately the decisive cause of whether one accepts or rejects the gospel. And Piper very clearly argues that on Calvinism versus Arminianism or Provisionism or the non-Calvinistic vantage point, the decisive cause is God for whether you accept or reject the gospel on Calvinism. Whether you accept or reject the gospel on every other view is the free agent. And so the reason we're held responsible for our decision to accept or reject the gospel is because we are the decisive cause of whether we accept or reject the gospel on our view. And I agree with him on that. I think that's a good way of putting it. But ultimately, you've made God the decisive cause of everyone's rejection of the gospel. Therefore, in my estimation, for all logical and practical purposes, you've put the blame on to God for everyone who ends up in hell. And that's unacceptable biblically and rationally as far as I'm concerned.